public access is through live streaming on YouTube, but that I'm not sure if that's live or delayed, but that's where we are. And public comments are accepted at comments@cheshirecT.org and by voicemail message at 203-271-6638. We'll start with the roll call. Arnett?
Mr. Oop, I lost you. Hang on. Okay, Mr. Slocum?
Here.
Mr. Borrowy?
Present.
Mr. Jenks?
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Good, the hears have it. Okay, we will rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, here we are. We're going to start this evening first with the discussion regarding consideration of a poet laureate. Just as a reminder to members, we had received a letter dated September 5th, 2019. So we're not so far off that date. I mean, it's less than a year. Oh no, it's more than a year. But at any rate, we in the interim had also had some personal contact made before the town council as a whole. I don't remember that exact date, but Ms. Mottola had made a presentation. So I wanted to have an opportunity for us to at least discuss it. And if it would be helpful to all, I could read the initial letter. I know you have copies of it, but if you'd like it read, I'd be happy to read it. It's sort of a review. But in general, the letter states her credentials, teaching creative writing, her interest in poet laureates, how there's 25 in the state. The state has one official state poet laureate, that she had spoken to Beth Crowley at the public library, and Ms. Crowley was seemingly happy about the concept, and with that sought to come before the council because she'd like to volunteer or be appointed for that role. Now, from my perspective, this was not anything that was on council's radar. Doesn't mean we dismiss it out of hand. I'm not suggesting we do that. But again, it certainly wasn't on our radar until it was brought to our attention. Any comments from members of the committee?
I think it's a great idea, actually. I think a lot like the town historian.
Yeah, I have a quick comment.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Jenks.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's a good idea. And I think one of the reasons why this came forward now, or when it did, was had to do with our sustainable CT project or program, and one of the action items for moving to either bronze or silver certification with the sustainable CT has to do with actually having a poet laureate or having sort of kind of cultural arts action items that would she would sort of coordinate through the library or through other organizations in town, and have a it's a way of sort of bringing people together around the arts. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why it came forward when it did, and why I'm supportive of it. But also I just think why not have a poet laureate? I mean, it's something to why not have someone in town who's sort of their responsibility to encourage and have people learn about creative writing and poetry. It seems like a good thing to me.
David, you said you thought it was a good idea, so I guess it's time for Tim the Philistine to speak up. I think it's not a bad idea. I just don't think the town has to have a poet laureate. I think this could very well be a function that comes out of the Department of Education. It could be tied to our arts area or our library and function as any number of other things that they could build a program around, as opposed to us building an office for, not to imply that we've built an office for a town historian or anyone like that. Um, it just seems to me to be another um, less needed position in town. I mean, we were asked to have a town crier at what time. Apparently, the state has a town crier or state crier. Certain towns do have town criers. Um, the council at the time had great respect for the applicant, who happened also to be the town historian at the time, and we just felt that it wasn't a necessary addition to that person's role or future town historians' roles. So, we just suggested, thank you for the presentation, but no thanks. So I, for one, am not at all interested in making this something that has to be part of the town's roster of professionals or unprofessional volunteers, whatever you want to call them. I just don't think it's necessary. But that's my opinion. A planning committee of 3 is entitled to one negative point of view, I suppose. So is the sense of the committee we want to deliberate on this further, or what? I mean,
Well,
to
I
me,
mean,
if you've got one person interested, if you have one person interested, and you say, yeah, well, what about, are there other people interested? I mean, do you open the door for other applicants who, in my mind, are, I think the arts are an interesting thing. And I think there is a desire out there for the arts to perpetuate. I think a lot of that does start in the teaching communities, where they see philosophy majors dwindling. They see probably people that specialize in poetry dwindling. And so there is the need to sort of, enlighten the folks, I suppose. I just think it can be facilitated through different avenues. I'd start with the Board of Education myself and see what they would like to do, or the arts. So do we want to build a further consensus on that, or am I just barking up the wrong tree here with this group of 3?
Well, I see that we have some common ground here. I see that you do think that it's something that maybe we could talk to the Board of Ed about. I think it's something we should also talk to the librarian about. I think we could talk to the Fine Arts Commission about and get their thoughts on it as well. And let's send out information to them, or a letter to them from you as chairman of the planning committee, saying that we are looking into the possibility of having a poet laureate for the town of Cheshire. What are your thoughts? And ask those 3 interested parties and others that might.
I would honestly couch the question differently. However, I would indicate that we have someone who has expressed an interest in being the poet laureate. And I think that's a little different. You've created an applicant's created an opportunity for a job.
Well, it's not a paying job, just like historian. And I think a lot of good has come out of having a historian. And I think a lot of good in terms of quality of life, in terms of program enrichment at the library, is one of Friends of the Library may, coordinate some programs. Schools, maybe there be a poetry month or something with the schools. But I think I appreciate the fact that we have an applicant, but I'm not wedded to that person being the one who gets this position. I think we need to create the position first and then see who's interested in it. And I do very much appreciate that somebody came forward, but I'd like to see what interest there is and what those 3 groups of people or others would have them do, and then put out notice in the newspaper or something that, hey, we're looking at considering to appoint somebody as our first poet laureate, an inaugural poet laureate for a year, or some kind of a sunset time frame, and see who does come forward. That wonderful lady that applied and we met back in March or February before we were reduced to Zoom meetings, it seemed very nice, but there may be other people from town who are qualified as well.
Well, it would be a council appointment, so
Right.
I guess I don't think we're putting out an RFP for something like that.
No, I don't.
I could be wrong, but
No,
I don't foresee it.
I don't put this on the same par as the next item on our agenda, RFP for town attorney.
Exactly. So we can do one of two things. We can agree to meet again on this topic and discuss it further after maybe doing some investigative groundwork or homework with some of these parties that we've mentioned, librarian, Board of Education, curriculum person, or whatever. Um, or we could refer this to the full council. I personally don't think it's ready for referral to the full council. Um, so that being said, I'm willing to, you know, do a little more investigative digging into parties who would actually be sort of responsible for this person. I know the town historian has a relatively independent role, which I think is important. She at this point, Janae Chesnow, has certainly made certain focuses of her assignments over the various years. We haven't had any real direct input into that, as I would suspect we wouldn't with a poet laureate. There's a degree of independence they obviously have to have. But I think for me, it's just an unclear thing. I don't know what the heck you roll out a poet laureate for, other than to read a
Well,
poem.
that's what I was going to say, is that I think that we, the three of us deciding now to not do it would be kind of shortchanging the potential of what this is. We have no idea what the poet
I
laureate
agree.
would be. We have no idea what it could become. So I think it would be a good idea to, I guess, talk to our performing arts commission, or talk to someone in Board of Ed, or I don't know who. I don't know, the library certainly. I think those are good places to start. I do think that we should sort of learn more, understand more about what the role would be before we decide to, not go forward with it. I guess I don't quite understand, since we have something similar in that we have a town historian. I don't really understand what the reluctance is in having a poet laureate. It just seems like just another sort of field of the arts, or humanities. So.
And I guess
Um,
you're completely right, Jim. I don't disagree with that. It's just that the foundation is not clear to me. I'm not sure what it is
Sure,
and what
sure.
they do. Suddenly there's some kind of there's some kind of a voice representing the community. No, not every voice who represents the community is loved or enjoyed by every member of the community. I respect that as well. But I'd like a little more foundational information on what this role actually does. I've read some of the recommendations. I've read some of the stuff, but I think we should go forward and ask some of the departments that might actually be more engaged in this. So can we agree that that's what we're going to do?
How do we do that?
I can reach out to the through staff, can reach out to a few people and maybe just get some input from them, and then we
Okay.
can follow up on it.
Good.
So I
Sounds good.
appreciate getting some information tonight, where this actually emanated from as part of our, sustainable thing, so I guess that's where it started. I had that aspect of it I had sort of forgotten. At any rate, that's what we'll do then. So no referral yet to the full council, just some more conversations and some more foundational research to go into this. Okay,
Okay.
I'm going to move us along then to the discussions about our legal services. As all of, Jim and Dave, you're relatively new to the council, but our current council has been employed by the town since 2007, Bertha Kalina. I'm not sure if the history with Bertram Moses, who does the labor side of things, is in fact a little longer than that. I believe it may be. I believe Bertram Moses served the town as town attorney prior to that, after John Knott had left the town services. I believe. I think that's what it was.
I think you were correct. And when they went to Merthyr, they kept labor with Bertram.
Right. Now
They kept what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
The labor piece of it stayed with Bertram, who was also the town attorney at the time.
Right.
Okay.
So essentially, Floyd Dugas, who was actually the presenter of the RFP that you have in your packets, he serves as labor attorney for the town, and many of us have gotten to know him over the years, simply because we're involved in contract negotiations at one level or another. Now, the other piece of this that I'd like you to fill in, Sean Arnett, would be the role and the cost um, that goes into bond counsel? Because I haven't seen that as a separate piece that we have received, nor how that fits into the total budget for town attorney.
So that's a good question. It doesn't fit into the general fund budget that we're most commonly looking at as our town attorney services.
Is
Your
it
bond
expense
counsel,
to bonds
it's
and
expense
borrowing?
as of right, depending on the contract you have, and there are a number of different proposals, and the size of the issuance, right, which is a factor. There will be scaled often. The bond fees are paid out of the bond issuance itself.
Okay, okay. So that kind of explains the fee a little. But as a rule, would you even begin to would you be able to convey essentially what that's worth to a bond counsel firm? Seems like there's a handful of firms that really handle that. It's a boutique type of thing, from what I can see. Not a lot of these submittals include that.
It's just
As all three. It's definitely a very specialized
Right.
yeah.
profession, so to
It
speak.
is. There's only a handful that would be offering probably all
Right.
of the services. I think as we saw from the submittals, we did
Right.
advertise it, and just for folks watching at home, we
Right.
advertised all three at the same time, which is, I think, a decision point that this committee will have to kind of think about is as we advance to the sort of the interview phase of this, how do we want to handle that? Do we want to do a specialty first? Do we want to interview firms no matter what specialty they had, if they were a firm that we were interested, so that will be a conversation
Right.
tonight.
Right. Okay. I just kind of wanted to get that out of the way because I didn't recall how they were paid, and now I better understand it. So they're probably paid handily. Now, one thing,
Yeah.
Sean, that I've heard you comment about, not as a negative thing, but just what a pain in the neck they can sometimes be. And I only mean that in dotting the I's and crossing the T's and driving you guys crazy on how everything is written and proposed. I could be mistaken, but that's sort of a takeaway from Tim Slocum.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked about this before with well, certainly my conversation with Jim. So Jim Jascott, I should point out, the finance department probably interacts with bond counsel more than any of us, frankly. Other than they are responsible and also legally responsible for the resolutions, particularly obviously with capital projects, because that's what they're that's what we're bonding typically. They would be they're responsible for the accuracy of those, all the legal mumbo jumbo, if you will, that's required as part of all of those resolutions. I will say we fully admit, we are not necessarily an easy client with respect to the fact that we, especially in recent years, have been approving a large number of maybe smaller capital projects, as we've done more kind of maintenance projects in recent years versus maybe one large issuance for a large, a new school or something, which again, maybe in our future, one of the reasons we talked about making sure we have a firm that we're comfortable with now. The other reason that we're a little difficult and not that unique, every town's a little different. This is a little unique to us. Our charter requires this look back for 5 years for similar capital, for the same capital project. And without getting into all the details, although I know the three of you are all familiar with, if you take an example of a window project at the high school, well, we need to look back and say, have we done windows at the high school? Now, that's maybe a bad example because I think we've had those every year for the last few years. As soon as that crosses that $500,000 threshold, they're ultimately responsible for telling us, yes, that needs to go to referendum. And when we've had a lot of these, small driveway improvements at the schools, HVAC improvements at Doolittle, Highland, and Dodd as one project. But then the next year we say HVAC improvement at Dodd. Well, bond counsel has to say, wait a second, how much of that is going to be part of the Dodd project, and has it crossed 500,000? So I don't want to belabor it, but I will say that makes their job a little harder, no matter who our bond counsel is, because we have had these complicated sort of, rather than maybe say, we want $1 million for HVAC at one school, we kind of parse it over multiple years, and we kind of create these problems for ourselves. Not right or wrong, It just means that from a tracking and accuracy standpoint, I think it's a challenge. So yes, to your point, we've had some trouble because we've had to find and correct at times, or kind of point out what we believe is a misunderstanding from bond counsel of what the project's actually doing, which again, the client is often going to know better anyway, on what the project's intended to do. And then, but yes, I mean, our net can attest, I and Jim have in recent years, found some things that needed to be fixed kind of at the last minute when we're ready to go right before the council with adoption. So I think that's a fair statement.
And I think to your point about some of the difficulties, I think some of it has also been in the way we've received projects for review, and hadn't identified that they were for specific place, or we did identify it for specific place, and now it's a look back that gets confusing. How did they break it up between the schools or whatever it might be? That was part of it, I believe, and we've
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, and some of it's been created.
and we've sort of
absolutely.
Right, but we've sort of redirected our energies at trying to clean some of that aspect of it up.
We are, yeah. One of the, again, without belaboring it, one of the
Right.
things I've noticed that we do is we will propose, say, a boiler replacement at the fire department, the fire annex, and the police department as sort of for simplicity's sake as one project in our book. Once you've done the first year of that, and that was just the fire department, bond counsel isn't going to necessarily know that with the same title the next year, you're not doing another boiler at the fire department. All right. I mean, those are things that we can,
Right.
we are committed to
Right.
cleaning some of that up. But I've noticed that can be just really staff driven. We've put the same title in
Exactly.
for consistency, but it's confusing bond counsel.
Right. Okay. Well, and finally, before I open it up for question on bond counsel, I think this is an area where staff plays the most critical role in helping us make a determination. And so I'm presuming you may have looked at there were three proposers. One that was a full service firm that incorporated that in their proposal. And then the other two are proposing that they only be bond counsel. And is there basically equal prices there? I mean, is it essentially baked in to the costs based on the bond issuance and how they're determined? And if you don't know that to me is really one of the critical questions, and how you work with them.
Yep. So why don't sorry, my light keeps going off every 20 minutes. I would, and I didn't invite Jim Jaska to this meeting, and maybe we can do so at the subsequent one. If
Absolutely.
I definitely like to talk to him a little more about that. If you're
I think that's perfect.
Providing
I was
a staff,
trying
evaluation of where we think and who we think we'd recommend interviewing, because I agree it's a little more specialty, and frankly,
Yeah.
the council doesn't.
That's sort of what I had hoped to do, is sort of get it off the table and back to staff for their input. I think committee, do you agree that might be more valuable with at least that particular piece of it? Are you comfortable with that approach?
Yeah.
Sure.
I am.
Okay.
I'd like to see
Okay.
bond separate from the other two pieces.
That's fair.
Okay. So that's relatively easy. Now, maybe that's another way to also consider. Well, it's interesting with the labor side of things. It's already split. Now, I can speak to the other members here, David and Jim. We did interview, and I cannot recall the year. I was chairman at the time, so it's going back 5-6 years, maybe longer. We did interview for labor with Murtha. We actually asked them, I think when they were initially hired in 2007, they perhaps didn't offer those services, or they didn't, whatever the decision was made, it was just decided to stay with Bircham. And it may have because we were negotiating contracts. I don't even know. I wasn't part of that team. But that's, so we decided to stay with Bircham. So, basically Floyd Dugas and his associates have been sort of running that side of our legal services for a long time. That's the only history I can lend it. I do have one question about it, though, before we have a general discussion on it. Does that piece get added to 100% of the town budget, or is part of that shared by Board of Ed? How does that piece out? And including this budget, this appears on the town, the whole figure here for for 300,353 for Merthyr Kalina is on the ticket, correct? Or is a portion of that a portion to Board of Ed if there's services that they deploy? How's that work? I'm referring to a recent attachment we received that was good enough to actually total things out. Arnett, you sent it out tonight, and it's called Town Attorney Hourly Fee Schedule.
Right.
And it had cumulative hours totaling 1,212 hours for a total fee of $300,353. And that was for a period of June 20. Well, it was from a period of July of 2019 to June of 2020. So that doesn't include the labor side, correct? That's
Right.
strictly,
That is
that's
straight,
strictly,
right, so that's
Correct.
Mercer. The second
Right.
attachment was our
so,
labor
right.
side.
Right. And so when I added those together, I'm not sure the year's drive, but we got closer to 333,000 because Birch and Moses fees were almost 33,000 in the attachment that you provided also tonight that was sent out to the members
Right.
tonight. So when I see them all added up, it adds up to $333,192 for the same time frame for legal and labor legal. So my question with that is that the total fee? Because it does incorporate BOE in all of these numbers, that are on the Merthyr Kalina, for example, but none of that gets apportioned to them. It's strictly paid by the town.
So anything on, I mean, Arnett, correct me if I'm wrong, but with labor, the labor fees on the Bertram billing that we have on that should be the town labor. They pay their own labor fees, and I think they do use Bertram and Floyd as well, but they have their own separate budget for that.
Okay, fine. So Beecher Moses, Floyd Dugas, because I know we've done arbitrations and we've done Board of Education arbitrations. That costs money to go to arbitration, obviously, and we've borne some additional costs and sometimes realized some savings. But again, the board is bearing that cost as well. For our next meeting, could I have that information? Because clearly a decision that would be made on this, you're telling me one thing, that the Board of Education could retain their own labor attorney if they so chose, and the town could decide upon a new one. That's a general question, not a decision point.
That is my understanding. I have to confirm, but that's my.
Does that sound right, Arnett?
Yeah.
We just happen to be. See, I wasn't honestly certain of that because it's been the same team.
Right.
And I'm not aware of whether or not the Board of Ed uses any other labor attorneys. They very well may, and they may not just use Floyd.
Mhm.
But the labor costs would be billed directly to them. As an aside, any Board of Ed costs, any work that Merthyr does for the Board of Ed is actually covered on the first chart that lists the Merthyr Kalina hourly fees. It's under the category of separate billable matters. Those dollars do get billed back to the Board of Ed, and the Board of Ed pays for them. It totals this particular year probably totals a couple $1,000s.
Yeah,
Okay, so the big piece for them is really the labor side when they have contract.
And if they have any other attorneys,
other issue, and they may retain other attorneys.
And I was going to say, I think they may also have additional Board of Ed school specialty attorneys for other school-related matters. I believe I talked to Jeff about that. I haven't recently, so don't quote me, but I believe that's the case as well.
And that's fine with me. I just want the planning committee to understand that the impact of our decision doesn't necessarily do a big deal for that side of the street. They can cover their own things as necessary with any changes we would be making. It wouldn't be impactful, basically. It's essentially what you're saying. They make their own decisions. Okay. Anything else, guys, before we maybe get into a few of the particulars on some of the firms?
No.
Okay. Um, Now, Arnett, I assume you are the one who put this summary together,
Which
the one
summary?
that's on legal size paper. It actually just sort of broke out
Yeah.
for us,
I
the
cannot,
law firm, and
Yeah.
it's a nice format. It says town attorney, labor, and bond counsel. They're Xed off if they were applying for that. It gives basic hourly rates. And I did have a question relative to the fact that we're paying a retainer currently. Now, I can't see that someone here offered to pay a retainer, but the bottom line is a retainer of $21,000 a month from Mertha Kalina is basically an agreement to make a minimum payment every month. So there are some months where they may barely exceed their retainer or be very close to it. Is that about right? I'm looking at the cumulative monthly totals,
Right. So
and they
that-
generally go between 29 to 21,000 and change.
and if you go to the chart that was sent today,
Mhm.
which you.
That's the one I
unfortunately-
was looking at. It's on.
Okay.
It,
It actually, it outlines the, it takes into consideration the impact of the retainer. And it takes a look at the write-ups and the write-downs based on the
Mhm.
retainer
mhm.
and nets it out and compares an average blended hourly rate. So with the retainer and with the write-downs and the write-ups, write-downs balancing them out, the net average or the average blended hourly rate is $247 and change.
Right.
Under the
So-
gross amount, it's $254 and change. So we actually save a little bit by being on retainer. It's not significant, but
Okay. Well, I think the fact that for this period that you provided this template tonight to look at, there was a total of 1,212 hours that accumulated over 12 months that were billable at an average of 247.82 to equal roughly $300,000. So the bottom line is, if we're looking at approximately 1,200 hours, that's a way to sort of interpret some of these rates. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and that's actually why I asked for this chart to be kind of created, was because Mertha was the only, I believe, applicant with the retainer, and it's in the new proposal as well. In order to try to compare apples to apples, to me, you needed the.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that, Sean.
You need to know the total number of hours, and just what you said is really, I mean, we can look at the blended rates and the write-ups and write-downs, but really, you want to know how many hours, and again, that's 1 year, there's other years, but how many hours the attorney worked, and sort of separate from what we were charged, because frankly, with the retainer, that's a different piece of information. And that way you could apply the other firms and say, well, if we had been with that firm, roughly blending a rate, what would we have expected to be, and are we $5,000 off or $50,000 off of where that would be?
Right. And I realize every year is a little different, but when I did a little chart, I just decided to put together the last 11 years. I started out thinking it was 10. It ended up being 11 because I couldn't count. But I just stuck with my formula. And I shared this late tonight with you guys. I don't know if you all received it, but on an 11-year average, we've spent $338,000 roughly in legal fees a year. Okay. And ironically, Sean probably did the same thing to come up with his budget this year. That's about $1,600 less than, it's $1,600 more than the average that we budgeted for this coming year. So I guess we've been fairly consistent with the ups and downs. Sometimes we spent a lot more money because there was an action, a trial. Sometimes has made a big difference.
Sometimes the settlement will be in those budget numbers.
Yep. And so some of those have been kind of extraordinary. We did have the issues with the state of Connecticut. That took some extra effort. Anytime we do contracts with, the ambulance, all that stuff, it all kinds of adds up to some of those fees. Now, then my next question is, would it be useful to run some numbers on the hourly rates based on 1212? I mean, 1,212 hours. I mean, is that a way to do it? I mean, maybe one year he's done 1,500 hours. I have no clue.
Yeah, I mean, if I could jump in, I mean, from my perspective, we certainly could or try to come up with sort of what we believe a blended rate. If you notice, some of the proposers will give you, the partner rates all the way down to paralegal rates, and
Exactly.
so this is our retainer is inclusive of all of those, so it does get to be, I mean, and even separate and apart from the fact that different firms will work at different speeds. I mean, a part of what we would be interviewing, trying to
Right.
get evidence for how they work and how they organize and what their support teams are like, so that you know how quickly you can expect work to get done, or you're being billed for slower work theoretically. I mean, that's a little harder thing to ascertain in these sort of things, I recognize, but
Well, do you think it would be reasonable to, say we narrow it down to 3 proposers that we want to actually talk to and interview?
mhm,
Do you think it would be reasonable in part of our conversations to suggest that the town is somewhat comfortable with a retainer?
mhm,
I mean, based on the measure of those services, there's obviously going to be some that are more expensive per hour than others. I'm certain it's that way with Mirtha. There's
mhm.
probably profit centers on some and less on others. I'm not really sure. Is that reasonable or is that a dumb way to do it?
I think that's definitely a possibility, and I think, and remember too with the retainer, it's also when individual cases or topics exceed a certain number of hours, they do switch into billing those at an hourly rate. So that's the current agreement we have with Mirtha now. So
Well, I know when we hired their litigator
mhm,
on one case, I won't mention the case, but it was a big case and it went on for a long, long time. When
mhm,
that was going to go to trial, that was going to be an extraordinarily high hourly rate.
right,
And that sent shivers up our spines, and things did settle out differently. But you'll notice that there was a big budget increase one year to accommodate for that, and it was never met. So I know that that's probably how any firm would have to do it if you end up in court
right.
uh, defending the town in a matter. Um,
Yeah, I mean, so an example being if we've had land acquisitions in recent years, for instance, if as soon as that work, which is very complicated legal work for the transaction, especially if there's 3 parties, for instance, as soon as that work has exceeded 25 hours, that switches to the 255 that's in the contract now. Right.
okay. Did you guys have any? I know I've monopolized a lot of conversation, but I was only trying to really set the table. Do you guys have any questions based on what we've talked about, or comments to make based on what we've discussed? Ideas?
I just, do- I, I dozed off a little bit, Tim, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. You're very honest.
Yeah, one question, I was just kidding, Tim. I've been awake the whole
It's
time.
fine.
One question I had was having to do with, so if we have a sort of a sense of how we need our attorneys to work with us, and we also have a pretty good sense of what we need sort of hourly rate to be, could we sort of look at, I guess, could we sort of look at this in the way of, we know what our rate needs to be, and can we sort of turn the tables on it a little bit and say, this is what we need from you based on this hourly rate?
Well, I think it all also boils down to who you might exclude because of an hourly rate that's been presented, or a comfort zone with the resumes you've read, and then maybe narrow it down to a few. And then I think you obviously have to talk to these people. Um, I think you have to
Yeah.
have an interview.
Sure.
I just think we have to
Yeah,
use some
yeah, no, I wasn't
criteria
suggesting you
to
don't, yeah.
narrow it down.
Right, right. Staff, again, has always been very material in these decisions. In the time that, and it's not many times we talked about changing town's attorney, but when we have, I mean, staff has often leapt to their defense, or to whatever, just to point out all the behind the scenes we couldn't even possibly understand, and how the different departments actually engage the town's attorney office. I mean, some deal with them a lot more extensively, and have relationships that are valuable. So I guess that's important. I wouldn't want to rule out comments from the staff. Say, for example, the only one we can really talk about with that foundational information would be Merthyr Kalina. I mean, they're the only ones who or Floyd Dugas, because we've talked to them. But I know at Merthyr, they've had staff changes there. I've seen some extremely impressive attorneys that we've dealt with, and then sadly they've gone off somewhere else. For that's what people do. They change jobs, they do whatever. So where do you want to take it now?
Let me ask a question related to what we were talking about, which is hours and stuff. And looking at this chart that Arnett sent out, it looks like we used about 90 hours a month. And one of the proposals was a retainer price, and it would include 40 hours a month. We're not going to use 40 hours a month, judging by what we have in the past. So we'd have to, if we are going to consider that firm, which happens to be the incumbent firm.
I think that was that the way the summary was written? Because the math on that didn't work at all. I looked at the summary and tried to do the math on that, and I got like $136 an hour for that. So that didn't make any sense.
Well, the retainer usually comes at a lower rate if you're doing that, and it's at 20. I don't know how much we're allowed to say in public about this. I guess I have to go there first, but if we're allowed to say what these are, but it talks about 40 hours for a certain flat fee per month. There's a retainer, and it does come to less than that. But the hours they're proposing are more hours than we've been using. So are they saying that we should be using more hours, and there's going to be a need to fill those, or what do we do about that? Because I like having this chart we just got today showing that we used 1,000 hours for the year, which is about 90 hours a month, which is about 90 hours a month.
Yeah, it was exactly that. It was
so that's
94.8.
Yeah, so that's 27 or 20. That's about 25 hours a week. 20. No, I had it figured.
12 divided by 12.
Yeah,
12.
So it's less than what they're proposing here. So my point is, are they thinking we're not using enough hours? We need to be doing more, or can we say that, hey, we're going to negotiate that price down for the retainer? So, and this being new information, because we just got the chart showing how much we actually use in hours, is going to be very helpful.
I'm not sure that what's on this chart is accurate.
The chart,
which summary.
one?
The summary, that's what I was questioning. I thought maybe they could be a mistake there.
The summary we got today, or the summary of the 8 proposals?
The one that came in your packet before.
Yeah, the legal paper we have. It didn't really work out mathematically for me. I decided maybe it was a little faulty.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to look at their, I can't take credit for this. I didn't do this chart, but I should have checked it more carefully. I'd have to look at their actual submission, because it says estimated at 40 hours per week.
Right.
Which is 120
Which is
hours.
a lot more than
which is
what we're using.
Basically, full time. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So we'll clarify that.
Okay. Also makes the 21,000 a good price.
Well, that was my reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was a very low hourly rate.
Right. Okay. So we'll look at that. But yes.
But
I'll
probably
check
then,
that.
probably then, more importantly, it'll be if we use that 1,200 hours, say 100 hours a month, we can maybe sort of come up with some numbers quickly for what these hourly rates would work out to be, right?
Yeah.
Are you looking for something? Are you looking for an estimated?
We're not looking to increase our costs and reduce our service, obviously.
Well, obviously.
So we know we need to feel like if we're making a decision, we're making it within the framework of how we've operated consistently.
So would you want us to do an exercise that would say, let's make assumptions? We'll make an assumption A, it's 1,000 hours a month, and assumption B is, no, it's 100
I
hours a
think,
month.
Arnett, what you're working on, what you're stating basically could be helpful, because I think from there we could have, um, six firms that we know what they might cost us a year,
Given those
um,
assumptions. And you
given
can
some
compare.
assumptions. And
Yeah.
I realize, because some of the numbers are much more than we're spending now on an hourly basis. Some are less. Um, so I think that could help us some if we had that. You guys agree?
Well, I
We'll
think
have
the
to-
only one that doesn't give us an hourly rate that we can use to compare is the one we're talking about, because it has a retainer. So we need to figure out if the amount in there that says per hour and litigation, et cetera, is also what they expect it to be. So once we clarify that, then we'll know where they are. And quite frankly, if we've got, some at $200, some at $250 an hour, and some at $300 an hour, probably an easy way to call some of this out is to say, well, we're not going to meet with the $300 an hour ones.
Oh, yeah, that's very easy. Well, here's the question. That 21,000 retainer, is that the current retainer?
Yes.
Because
I'm
that's what I
looking up-
thought. So
I'm
this is
looking
all
at the
very
appointment
close.
resolution.
Yeah, this is all pretty close to what this chart we got tonight from the town attorney
It is. I mean,
sort of
21,000
stands up against.
21,000 is the current retainer. I know Arnett's checking to confirm. I know that I just pulled up the proposal, and there is, Arnett's correct. The chart says 40 hours per week. This says this would cover all general matters based on an estimate of 40 hours per month, to exclude litigation and administrative appeals, et cetera. So
That's a big difference.
that's
Yeah.
but that's again, an estimate. I believe that's the similar. We can confirm what's in our current contract as well, but I believe it's status quo. See, I think the issue with that comparative chart is not so the total number of hours, what isn't sort of easily parsed out from that is how many of those individual projects exceeded the 25 hours and therefore began being billed separately from the retainer, right? So it's not a simple arithmetic equation, if you will.
Yeah.
Really the
Yeah.
blended rate, comparing the blended rates probably, I guess the one method of comparing, but it is true. That's why we tried to do this calculation to try to account for the retainer when the others didn't have it. But there's probably more we can parse out there.
Yeah, within reason, something that we could receive in advance before we meet again, because at that point, I think we could make a determination of who we, might want to interview. And then I was thinking that it might be appropriate now to go into an executive session, because there's some matters I think we could discuss more comfortably if we were in an executive session. If that seems reasonable and members agree, I would ask a motion to go into an executive session. Obviously, this committee makes no decisions in an executive session, but we could have some material conversations that come out of it. That are recommendations that help us. So it's just something I thought if we could consider, and someone would advance that if they'd like to.
I'll make that motion because I would like to speak more freely to Sean and get his opinion on current people. And we certainly can't get a public answer on, how the relationship is.
Yeah, I agree. I second that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Okay,
and
so
just,
we're going to move into an executive session to include Arnett Talbot and Sean Kimball and the three members, and give Mike an opportunity to do what he needs to do. And then he'll come back and tell us we're all clear. So at this point, I would just ask everybody to mute their headsets or their
Okay.